The first thing we're going to talk about is comparison. The topic here is things that our parents said to us that were negative and hurtful and critical that we have carried into adulthood that are still hurting us, and this is particularly problematic for people with autism. So number one is comparison. Not to worry, we're going to tie all these together in just a moment, and I got to say that I came up with 11 of these. And if I had thought about it, I probably could have come up with 1100. And I'm sure while we're talking here, you could apply some of these to yourself. You say, yeah, I remember, I heard that. Or you could think of others that didn't even come to my mind. You can let us know what those are if you want, but the first is comparison. You know, when your parents say, why can't you be like your brothers and sisters? Now, I had probably the best parents you could imagine, but they weren't perfect. And I grew up in a relatively large family. And there was no such thing as an ideal family, but I'm supposing that our family was as close as you could come. We just, we had a good life. We weren't wealthy, we were middle class, but hey, we really had it good. But still, it wasn't perfect. And I can't ever remember my parents saying that I should be like my brother or I should be like my sisters, but I can remember them asking, Mom asking why I didn't bring kids around the house like my older siblings did. You know, I was the youngest of five, and when they were teenagers, they had a plethora of friends that they would bring to our house for various reasons. They just have fun, just kind of lighten up the house, brighten up the mood, and my parents loved it. But not knowing that I had autism and that I had what they would call social deficits or difficulties in making friends and having that circle of friends, they didn't understand. And I remember Mom said, why can't you bring kids over like your sisters did? And it bothered her. Probably would have helped if she had been a little nicer to some of my friends because she was protective, but that's beside the point. But outside of that, about as perfect as you could be. Something else they will say, this is number two, and these are what I call TOO statements, T-O-O. You are too fat, you're too ugly. Could you think of a TOO statement? Maybe you're too quiet, maybe you're too loud, maybe you're too noisy, you need to be quiet, you need to speak up, you need to be a little more of this or a little bit less of that. So you're always too something, and parents, I think, don't mean to do damage when they say those things, and I don't think any parents are exempt. This is not something we should use to beat up on our parents, but we should use it to realize that some of those things they said, probably not intentionally. Now, you may have had some bad parents that actually tried to hurt you, but largely I'd say that these were unintentional, but that doesn't mean anything. If somebody hit you with a rock intentionally and someone else hit you with a rock unintentionally, they both hurt the same. So, from our perspective, we're asking ourselves, what were these things that we're still carrying with us today? And those two statements, that you're too ugly or you're too fat or whatever, or too skinny. When I was a kid, I was basically skin and bones. I mean, you could literally count my ribs. If I took my shirt off, which I never did, but if I did, you could have counted my ribs. Some of these guys say they have six packs. How many ribs do you have? That was my pack. It was my ribs, not my muscles. I knew I had muscle because I could move, so I had to have some muscle. But I was about as skinny as a kid could come. Hard to believe because I grew up to eventually weigh 260 pounds. According to medical records, I was well above 250, so I'm guessing I got up to 260 at some point. But that kind of stuck with me my whole life. Maybe that's one of the reasons that I didn't mind putting on so much weight, is because I didn't like that self-consciousness of being skinny. What I should have done is put on muscle instead of fat, but that's beside the point. But it does affect us. What about empty promises? This is number three. Parents will give us promises sometimes. that we will do this for you, we will do that for you, we'll make sure that you have this, we're never going to do this, but then they do those things or they don't do those things they say they're not going to do. Empty promises. Well, how does that affect our adulthood? Well, you could probably imagine. It makes it difficult for us to trust other people when they make promises. And keep this in mind, particularly for those of you who are autistic. We're not the only ones that have these problems. I think everybody has them. They just seem to be a little magnified, a little exaggerated, a little more hurtful in people with autism. Number 4 is they will say that we're taking a wrong action, or they will emphasize wrong actions. They will say that we walk strange, we talk different, we talk too loud, we talk too quiet, we don't look right, which, by the way, when you start entering puberty, it's actually kind of a compliment for parents to tell you you look weird because you try to look strange. I mean, some of the styles that are going around now, you know why they do that? You know why kids do that? Because they want to be different. They're trying to separate themselves from their parents, which is a good thing. Because, I mean, it may not look good, but it's a good thing in the sense that they are beginning to withdraw from their parents so they can make it on their own. Now, when I was a kid, back in the 60s, early 60s, you know, the Beatles thing, and before that, it was basically burr haircuts, flat tops, and that greasy Elvis look. What did they call those? Pompadours. That was a style, and the Beatles came along and messed all that up, and man, was there an uproar. Now, the way that I'm wearing my hair now is the way I wore it when I was 13, 12 years old. But back then, this hairstyle, you know, there's no grease, there's no flat top, none of that. This hairstyle was considered outlandish. I mean, you know, I actually had people tell me I looked like a girl because they thought this was long hair. But that was the 60s. But the point is, they would say, you look strange. Well, when I was 13 years old, I wanted to look different. You know, most 13-year-olds do. But when you're younger, you know, elementary school age, maybe even before that, some years after that, when they tell you you walk funny, you're self-conscious. They tell you you talk too much or too little, that makes you self-conscious. And that sears your brain, you know, your mind, your thinking process. So here you are today, and you can't get rid of it. It's still there. And, you know, you're very self-conscious maybe about the way you walk or the way you talk. And, you know, this has an inverse effect. Parents can actually, this is why parenting is so difficult. They can actually do just the opposite. They can make you overconfident to a fault where we have too much confidence and then we get out on our own and we're too confident and we wind up falling on our faces. So number 5 is wishes. This is a horrible one. I hope you never heard this when you were a kid, but did your parents ever say, I wish you were never born? Or maybe, we're not going to say that, but wish you were never born. My parents never told me that, but I remember they told me that when I was newborn, that my sister tried to give me away. I guess she didn't want me in the house because I was competition, tried to give me to the neighbors. And I think the neighbors, you know, saw her outside. They knew there was a new baby in the house, me. And so they said something, you know, just joking to my little sister, who was, I think, 2 years old at the time, said, hey, we'll take that baby if you want to give him to us. She went inside and got me and took me outside. She's going to give me to my neighbors. Now, I don't know if she's just being nice or she didn't understand or she kind of wanted me out of the way, but that kind of stuck with me. Number 7 is when your parents or somebody will tell you that you are a burden. In the sense that you cost too much. Maybe your family's on a tight budget. Maybe they don't even have a budget. And they got to feed you. They got to take care of you. They got to pay, you know, for, like, you know, school supplies. They got to buy clothes and things that you just need to live on. Shoes are kind of expensive back in my day. when you wore out a pair of shoes, you went and got new soles put on them because it was cheaper than buying new shoes. Until you outgrew them, then, well, you had to buy them. But adults in particular, it was very common for adults not to buy new shoes. They would have them resoled. Put a new sole on them, is what I mean. Not sell them, but put a new sole on them. But sometimes parents will tell you that you're a burden. Now here's the glitch, is sometimes parents won't say this verbally, but they'll imply it implicitly. They will tell you that you are a burden. You're in the way. Maybe it's not a financial burden, but just being in the way all the time. Get out of the way. Keep telling your kids that, and after a while they're going to think, I'm in the way. And you grow up with that, and you still think you're in the way. Number 8, for example, your parents may say that, we kind of touched on this a minute ago, but they'll say you're stupid, or they say you're not coordinated, or you're not athletic. It's kind of like comparing you to your siblings, only it's more broad. What did your parents tell you that was demeaning? It's kind of hard for parents not to do that because, you're supposed to raise your children and you're supposed to point out their bad behaviors, obviously, so you can correct them. And some parents, they don't know where the boundary is. They don't know where you stop making criticisms for the purpose of healing the child's attitude. That's a good way to say it. And just, being demeaning and putting them down. And some parents, they love to put down their kids. They're bullies. They're a little bit narcissist, or they're a little bit they have what would you call it? A deficit of self-esteem is, I think, the best way to call it. And so they try to compensate by calling other people stupid. They may feel stupid themselves, so they're projecting. And they may do that to kids, because what are kids going to do? They talk back, they may get smacked or whatever. Something else, number 9, is I wish parents would not say this, but a lot of times they say this and they're being funny, or they're trying to be funny, and they will say, I hope you have kids someday, and I hope they're just like you. Then you will know what it's like. Well, now what? They're saying there's something wrong with you and you better not duplicate, because your punishment is going to be, having another you. So you are your punishment. I don't think many parents realize that's what they're saying, that's what they're impressing upon the minds of their kids when they do that. But yeah, you carry that throughout your entire life. You think you are inherently flawed. There's something about you that should not be duplicated. Thank goodness you don't have a twin. And if you did, you're just double trouble. All right, number 11 is, and again, this is a little bit something we talked about before, but number 11 is they may say you talk too much, or if you are autistic, they may say you don't talk enough. And by the way, there are some people with autism who just won't shut up. I mean, they talk nonstop. That's the way they are. My case, I very seldom ever talk to anybody ever. I had maybe 1 or 2 friends throughout my life that I was able to open up and communicate with in a manner that most people would consider normal, but I was never, my family members, my parents, my siblings, they were never inside my bubble. That was a place where I kind of lived by myself, and there were a handful of people throughout my life. Here I am in my 70s and still I can't think of anybody right now inside my bubble besides me. But throughout my life, I've had a handful of people that were able to come inside my bubble as if there were no bubble. And I'm very grateful for those people. But that was presented by not talking. I just stay inside my bubble. I'd stay all by myself, my little comfort zone. But I recall one time we had a group of adults at our house. My parents, they're what most people would call religious, and they started a church in our house. And by the way, that was 65 years ago, and that church is still going somewhere. It's out on the east side of the city, and it got really, really big. I think hundreds of people, maybe even 1,000 at one time. But when they first started the church, they would have adults come over to the house and, they'd talk, socialize, and I didn't know any better. They're in the middle of them, so I'd talk too. And I remember that annoyed my mother for some reason. I can say this because she's not around anymore, but she grabbed my jaw, like this, and she shook my little head and she told me to be quiet. And so I guess I better be quiet. I'm not going to talk. I recall when I first went to school, before my first day of school, my mom and sister, the same one who tried to give me away, were explaining to me what to expect in school. And one thing they said is, when you go to school, don't talk. What they meant was, don't talk out of turn, or don't talk when you're not supposed to talk. I was 5 years old. I thought you weren't supposed to talk, period. I didn't want to get in trouble, and so I went to school and I didn't talk to anybody, ever, unless I absolutely positively had to. So that was compounded by being autistic, where I really didn't socialize well to begin with. But here's a suggestion. If you are a parent of little kids, tell your kids to talk, for crying out loud. Tell them to speak up and to join the conversation if they can. And if they can't, that's okay, but there will always be another opportunity, another conversation. Let's tie all these together. Now, there are two things we can do about this, and they kind of contradict each other. This being those things that we're still carrying with us because of what our parents said to us, and it may have been a teacher or a playmate or a classmate or a neighbor or somebody, not necessarily just parents, but number one is we can be dismissive and not own it. To say, well, that was a long time ago and I'm over it. Chances are you're not over it. I'm not sure you can be over it. Now, over it may mean it doesn't bother you anywhere nearly as intensely as it once did. And I don't know, maybe you are over it. I don't know you. You could very well be over it, but I kind of doubt it. So we can be dismissive and not deal with it. The flip side of that is we can allow it to overburden us. Where we're just obsessed with it. And it becomes almost a compulsion, where we are very bitter and angry about the things that our parents said to us that has affected the way that we live our lives today. And I got to tell you, you already know this. I'm sure you do, but there are some kids who really have it tough. They were brutally treated, mistreated, abused when they were kids. I just read a new story, I think it was yesterday, about a mother, single mother, who went on vacation for 10 days. And she had a toddler, put her toddler in the crib, and left. Didn't tell anybody that the toddler was there in the crib. No food, no water, nothing. And when she came home, her daughter was no more. Little toddler, lost her life. And so what I'm thinking, when I was little, my mom grabbed my, jaw and shook my head. Well, that's nothing compared to what some kids are going through. So what I'm saying is, I don't want to be dismissive about that. But on the other hand, I need to be mindful that other kids are going through and have gone through, as long as there have been kids, gone through things that are infinitely more traumatic than what I went through. And maybe you were one of those kids. I hope not. But maybe you were, because, they're out there, and you could be one of them. Join our family by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you think it's worth it. I hope you did. Share it on social media always helps. So I'm kind of curious what your parents said to you that has affected you as an adult. That's why we have a comment section, so you can communicate with others. And we will see you all next time.